She burst in, faking joy. Great news, you're gonna be a dad, I smirked. And here's one for you, I can't be. Vasectomy. 2019, tell Donovan congrats. Her fake joy melted into panic. Here's the thing about carding an 82 at Millhaven Municipal. It doesn't happen often enough that you take it for granted, and it happens just enough that you know what it feels like when your swing is working. The course is flat, public, 9 holes, cart paths cracked down the middle like old leather. The regulars know your handicap and your business, and sometimes those two things are the same number. I'd been playing that Tuesday like the course owed me something, which it didn't, and by the 8th hole I was 2 over and feeling it. Donovan had texted from the clubhouse bar after the 7th. Nice round. First one's on me, my older brother. 41 years old, VP at Millhaven Ag and Trust. The kind of man who buys the round before you finished so he can be the one who bought it. I'd texted back a thumbs up and finished the 9, shot an 82. Best round of my life. I noticed his truck wasn't in the lot when I left. I filed that. Didn't open the file. Just filed it the way you file things that don't have a category yet. The drive home takes 11 minutes on county roads. Cut grass through the open window, cooling asphalt, the particular smell of a Tuesday in late September that makes you think everything is fine. Wren's car seat in the back, empty. Because she was at my mother's for the afternoon. I remember thinking I should call and check on her. I didn't. I was still thinking about the 8th hole. Sloane met me at the door. Face bright, hands clasped in front of her, the way she looked when she had news she'd been holding all day and couldn't anymore. She'd been beautiful when I married her. She was still beautiful. That was the part that cost me later. Not the betrayal exactly, but the specific face she was wearing when she delivered it. She said, "Great news. You're going to be a dad." I set my glass on the counter. I looked at her. I said, quiet as a card placed on a table, "And here's one for you. I can't be. Vasectomy, 2019. Tell Donovan congrats." She said, "That's not," and stopped. The sentence had nowhere to go. She looked like a woman who'd stepped off a curb that turned out to be further down than she'd calculated. I picked up my glass, walked to the back porch, sat down. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I started counting. You want to know what a county archivist does? We find the pattern in the record. We establish what actually happened, when, and in what order. We don't editorialize, we don't speculate. We look at the documents and we let the documents say what they say. I'd been doing it for 6 years in the basement of the Millhaven County Archive, cold tile and hanging fluorescents and document boxes floor to ceiling, and I was good at it in the way that quiet people are good at things nobody notices. I pulled out my phone and opened the Photos app. 41 images. I took the first one in March because Donovan's truck had been in my driveway on a Thursday, when Sloane said she was at a design consultation in Carthage. I'd driven past, hadn't stopped, just taken the photo through the windshield and kept going because I thought I was being paranoid. The archivist in me said, "Document it." The husband in me said, "You're wrong." The archivist was right. The images went back 14 months. Timestamps, locations, one motel receipt I'd photographed through the window of Donovan's car, where he'd left it on the passenger seat. His loyalty number printed right there on the header. I hadn't broken into the car. I hadn't needed to. He'd left the window down. Sloane came to the back door. She said, "Grady." I didn't turn around. She said, "It isn't what—" "Go inside," when I said. She went. I sat there until it was full dark, not grieving, counting. By the time I came back in, she was in the bedroom with the door closed, and I was already thinking about the next morning. The archive basement is coldest in the morning. The fluorescents take a full minute to stop flickering and settle into their flat hum. I was down there by 7, and I spread everything on the long table I use for document restoration. The photos organized chronologically, a printed timeline I'd put together on my laptop the night before, the motel receipt photo enlarged, Donovan's loyalty number visible and clear. I'd also printed Wren's crayon drawing from the refrigerator. She'd made it 2 months ago. She'd labeled it Daddy D. She was 4. She drew what she knew. The historian in me looked at the table and thought, "Thesis confirmed." The husband in me looked at the crayon drawing. and felt something go very quiet and very cold in the center of his chest. Not anger exactly, more like the specific silence after a filing cabinet drawer closes and you know the document inside it is never coming back out. My phone rang at 8:15. Number I recognized. Dr. Pruitt's office. Dr. Pruitt was 55, precise, the kind of therapist who used language the way a surgeon uses instruments. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative. We'd been seeing her as a couple for 8 months. She'd been seeing Sloane individually before that. She had a white noise machine outside her office door, beige walls, and the particular quality of attention that makes you feel like every word you say is being weighed. I answered. She said, "I can't break privilege. You know that." "I know that. But I can tell you to get a lawyer before Thursday. Write this name down." I wrote it. Vesper Calla, she said. Second floor of the Commerce Building. She doesn't lose. Pause. "Get there tomorrow," she said. "Not Thursday. Tomorrow." She hung up. I looked at the name on the paper. Then I looked at the table. Then I called Britta. Sloane's sister was 32, a dental hygienist, and had the specific cheerfulness of someone who has decided that if she stays sunny enough, consequences won't find her. She picked up on the second ring. "Grady, did Sloane tell you the news? Isn't it?" "She did," I said. "How long have you known?" Silence. The kind that has weight. "Grady, it's complicated." "It really isn't," I said and hung up. She called back twice. I didn't answer. I went back to the table and looked at the crayon drawing for a long time. Then I put it in the folder with the rest. Vesper Calla's office had a bare desk, one diploma, no plants. The diploma was from Michigan law. There was a single chair across from hers, and when I sat in it, I had the feeling I always get in rooms organized by people who know exactly what they're doing, that I should pay attention. She read the folder in 11 minutes. She didn't ask any questions while she read. When she finished, she closed it with the specific resistance of a well-made folder, that small, decisive sound of a thing being contained. She said, "You're a silent partner in the title company that handles every agricultural closing in this county." "Silent title," I said. "My grandfather started it. And Donovan is a VP at Ag and Trust, which finances those closings." "Yes." She looked at me. "You didn't stumble into a conflict of interest. You are the conflict." She smiled. Not warmly, precisely. "They handed us a corporate play." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that when Donovan used bank resources to facilitate a 14-month affair with his brother's wife, he didn't just violate your marriage. He potentially violated his fiduciary duty to the institution that employs him. And you have standing to be in that conversation." I sat with that. "Don't touch any accounts," she said. "Don't move out. Don't say a word to her. Not yet." "Okay. You're going to invite them both to dinner." I looked at her. She said, "Trust the process." Her paralegal, Cass Tully, was 28 and had the energy of someone who runs on convenience store coffee and institutional outrage. She was at the desk outside Vesper's office when I came out, and she looked up from a stack of filings and said, "I'll need your phone number and a secondary email," and she paused, like she was deciding whether to say the next part. This is going to sound random, but my cousin used singletune.com after her divorce. It's a values-based thing. You do this whole assessment before you even see any profiles. She said it was the first honest thing she'd done in years. She shrugged. "Just leaving it there." I wrote down my number. "I'll look at it," I said. I wouldn't. Not yet. I was not ready for anything honest yet. I drove home. Sloane was on the couch, phone face down on the cushion beside her. She looked up when I came in. There was something between relief and suspicion in her face. The specific expression of a person who has been rehearsing a conversation and isn't sure which version she's about to have. I said, "I think we should talk to someone. Maybe dinner this week. Just us. Work through it." She looked at me for a long moment. The phone stayed face down. "Really?" "Really," I said. I smiled. The smile cost me nothing. She said, "I think that's a good idea, Grady." "I'll make a reservation," I said. "I'll call Donovan, too. He can be family support." Her face did something complicated. She controlled it quickly. "Sure," she said. "That sounds good." I went to the kitchen and called the Cartwright. Vesper called at 10 that night. I was at the kitchen table with a glass of water I hadn't touched. She said, 14 months of motel charges routed through Ag and Trust as client entertainment. I didn't say anything. Donovan didn't just sleep with your wife, she said. He expensed it. The quality of the silence in the kitchen changed. I was aware of the refrigerator hum, the specific weight of the folder on the table in front of me, the sound of Sloane moving around upstairs. I said, "What's the board chair's name?" She said, "Holt Greer, Deacon, First Baptist." I said, "Good." The Cartwright grill runs to white tablecloths and a wine list that takes itself seriously, the kind of place where the candles are real and the portions are architectural. I'd made the reservation for 7. I got there at 6:45, got the table, ordered Sloane's wine before she arrived. Candles lit. Good chair for Donovan, the one with its back to the room, no sightlines to the door. I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. Sloane arrived first, which I'd expected. She was wearing the blue dress, the one she wore when she wanted to be taken seriously, and she touched my arm when she sat down and said, "I'm glad you're doing this." I said, "I know you are." She didn't hear the difference. Donovan arrived at 7:03. He was wearing a jacket, which meant he'd thought about the evening. He came around the table and put his hand out, and I shook it. The handshake was a performance by both of us. Firm, brief, the specific choreography of two men who know exactly what they're doing and are pretending they don't. He said, "Good man, Grady. Takes real strength." I said, "Sit down, Donovan." He sat in the chair with its back to the room. Through appetizers, I let them perform concern. They were good at it. Donovan had the particular skill of a man who has spent his career in a bank. He could project sincerity the way fluorescent lights project flat light, evenly, without warmth, in every direction at once. Sloane kept touching the stem of her wine glass without drinking. I noticed she'd adjusted her earring twice before the soup arrived. I asked Donovan about work. He talked about agricultural lending, Q3 numbers, a new portfolio they were developing in the eastern counties. I nodded. I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about the man in the gray jacket who was sitting at the bar with a briefcase, nursing a club soda, checking his watch. I'd called Cass at noon. She'd said, "Process server, 7:15. He'll wait for dessert." I'd said, "Tell him to wait for dessert." The dessert menu arrived at 7:12. The server was describing the chocolate torte when the man in the gray jacket stood up from the bar. He walked to the table with the specific, unhurried confidence of a man who has done this many times in many restaurants and has learned that speed is not the point. Presence is the point. He said, "Donovan Ashford?" Donovan looked up. "Yes." The man placed a document packet on the white tablecloth next to Donovan's dessert fork. "Civil suit, alienation of affection, Ashford vert Ashford. You've been served." The briefcase latch clicked once in the quiet of the room, a single, small, decisive sound. The table next to us went still. Donovan picked up the papers. He read his own name at the top. The color left his face in sections. First the forehead, then the jaw, the way a building loses power floor by floor. Sloane said, "What is—" I picked up my wine glass. I said, "I expected to shoot 85 this week. Ended up with 81. She stared at me. "What?" "Personal best," I said. "Funny how things work out." Sloane stood up. Her chair scraped back. Her voice came up with it. "You planned this? This whole dinner?" "Sit down," I said. She didn't. "You're doing this to humiliate me." "I'm doing this because Vesper told me to," I said. "Sit down, Sloane." She knocked her wine glass. It skidded across the tablecloth, hit the candle, didn't break. She looked at it like she wished it had. The table next to us had stopped pretending to eat. A server was hovering near the kitchen door, uncertain. I noticed, in the specific way you notice things when your nervous system has gone very quiet, that the server had a motivational phrase tattooed on his forearm, in script I couldn't quite read from this distance. I thought, at least one of us is inspired. Then I was back in the room. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, dropped cash on the table, enough to cover the bill and the trouble we'd caused. I looked at Donovan. He was still holding the papers. I said, "You should call your lawyer tonight, not tomorrow." I walked out. The night air was cool, the parking lot quiet. I got in my car and drove. I passed First Baptist on the way home. The lights were off. By morning, they wouldn't be. Cass texted me at 9:51. Process server confirmed. Millhaven Courier police scanner is already picking up the civil filing. I texted back, "Good night." I meant it. I slept better than I had in 14 months. The Ag and Trust boardroom was on the third floor, long table, one window overlooking the parking lot. The fluorescent strip above the table hummed a single flat note throughout the entire meeting. I noticed it the moment I sat down. I kept noticing it. Grady Ashford, silent partner, Silent Title Company, LLC. I'd had the right to that chair for 6 years. Nobody at Ag and Trust had ever thought to check. Donovan saw me when he came in. He went very still in the doorway. The way a man goes still when he realizes the room he's walking into is not the room he was told he was walking into. Vesper was already standing at the head of the table. She had a folder, a laptop, and the particular expression of a woman who has organized this room to her exact specifications and is now simply waiting for the participants to arrive. Holt Greer was at the far end, 60 years old, board chair, the kind of man whose money was old enough to be polite. He sat with his hands folded and his face neutral in the specific way of men who have made decisions that ended careers and have learned not to show the moment of decision. Donovan took his seat. He touched his collar once. Vesper opened the folder. She said, "I'm going to read you some numbers." She read the numbers. 41 motel charges, 14 months. Each one routed through Ag and Trust's client entertainment account. She read the loyalty number from the motel receipts, Donovan's number, the same one on every charge. She didn't editorialize, she didn't look up. She just read the numbers the way you read a document when you want the document to do the work. She said, 41 charges, 14 months. The loyalty points number on every receipt belongs to the VP sitting at this table. The fluorescent light hummed its flat note. Holt Greer didn't say a word. He nodded once. The room understood. Donovan pushed back his chair. He said, "I need to—" Cass Tully was in the corridor. I didn't know exactly how she'd gotten there. She had the specific talent of appearing in doorways at the correct moment, like a stage manager who has memorized every cue. She was standing with her back to the door, arms crossed, holding a second copy of the filing. Donovan looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "Mr. Ashford, I'd really recommend staying for the rest of the presentation." He came back to the table. By noon, he was on administrative leave. By 3 o'clock, the Millhaven Courier had the story. Small towns don't need leaks. They need one person at the diner who overheard the right conversation, and Millhaven had several of those. My mother called at 4. Nell Ashford was 67, a quiet woman who had spent 40 years being proud of her older son's career and her younger son's steadiness, and had never had to choose between them before. Her voice on the phone was the voice of a woman in the process of choosing. She said, "Tell me it isn't true." I said, "Which part, Mom?" Long silence. The kind that contains a whole restructuring of a world. She said, "I always thought Donovan was the steady one." I said, "I know you did." I didn't say anything else. She didn't need me to. The silence did the rest. Britta showed up at Sycamore Lane at 6. She was still in her work scrubs, which meant she'd come straight from the dental office, which meant she'd heard and hadn't stopped to change, which told me everything about the state she was in. She knocked once, then knocked again before I reached the door. I opened it. She said, "You destroyed her life." I said, "Come in." She came in, which surprised her. She'd been expecting a door in her face. I walked to the kitchen table and picked up the crayon drawing. Wren's, the one labeled Daddy D. I set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know about the baby." I said, "Now you do." She left without slamming the door. That was worse than slamming it would have been. It meant she'd absorbed it. It meant she was going to have to carry it home and sit with it in her own kitchen and decide what kind of person she was going to be. I sat alone in the archive basement at 9 that night. The cold tile, the flat hum of the fluorescents, the same note they always hit, the same note as the Ag and Trust boardroom. The document boxes floor to ceiling, other people's records, other people's histories. I opened my laptop. Here's the thing. I had Donovan's email password. I'd gotten it 3 years ago when he'd locked himself out of his account during a family holiday and asked me to help. I'd fixed it. I'd written the password down on a card in my desk, because that's what archivists do with information. They keep it. I'd never used it. I told myself I never would. I used it. I read 3 emails. The first was from a woman named Petra in Carthage, a different woman, not Sloane. The second was from the same woman. The third had photographs. I closed the laptop. I sat there with my hands flat on the cold table and thought, I'm not that guy yet. The word yet sat there in the room with me, patient, not going anywhere. I looked at it. I acknowledged it. I didn't pretend it wasn't there. Then I closed the laptop and went home. The next morning, a colleague named Rafe mentioned singletune.com over coffee in the courthouse hallway. He was talking about his brother, who'd gone through a bad divorce 2 years back. Did this values assessment thing, Rafe said, refilling his mug, said it asked him questions no first date ever would. What he believed in, what he'd been through, what he actually wanted. Said he finally understood what he'd been doing wrong in relationships for 15 years. Rafe shrugged. Met someone with the same values profile? They've been together a year. I was half listening. The phrase values test landed somewhere, though. It sat there the way useful things sit. Quietly, not demanding attention, just available. I refilled my coffee, didn't say anything, went back to work. Sloane called 17 times that afternoon. I answered once at 4:15 because I wanted to hear what she would say. She said, "You have to stop this." I said, you should call your sister." She said, "Britta's not picking up." I said, "I know." I hung up. By nightfall, the family had chosen. My mother called twice, once to cry, once to ask if Wren was all right. Britta didn't call again. Donovan's wife, a woman named Petra, which was a name I now recognized from 3 emails I wasn't supposed to have read, filed her own paperwork in Carthage County the following morning. Cass texted me the news like a sports update. Petra Ashford, Carthage County, same day. Dominoes. I texted back, "How'd she find out?" Cass texted, "She had her own file. She'd been building it for 6 months. She just needed someone to move first." I sat with that. Donovan had been running 2 simultaneous performances, and both audiences had been keeping notes. There was something almost professionally impressive about it, if you could stand far enough back to look at it that way. I couldn't, quite, but I could see the shape of it. The night before the hearing, Wren asked me why Uncle Donnie wasn't coming to her birthday. She was sitting on the bathroom counter while I helped her brush her teeth, which was the nightly negotiation it always was. She wanted to do it herself. I wanted it to actually happen. We compromised in the way you compromise with a 4-year-old, which is that she did it herself and I did it again after. She was wearing the pajamas with the foxes on them. She said, "Daddy, how come Uncle Donnie's not coming?" I rinsed her toothbrush. I said, "Uncle Donnie has to go figure some things out." She considered this with the specific seriousness of a 4-year-old who was not satisfied with the answer but is willing to keep going. She said, "Is he going far away?" "I don't know yet," I said. She looked at me. She said, "Daddy, are you coming?" I'd planned to let Sloane have primary custody without a fight. I'd told Vesper I didn't want a custody war, that I wanted Wren to have her mother, that I'd take every other weekend and be grateful for it. I'd told myself that was the clean, undramatic thing to do, the thing that would cause the least damage. I changed my mind in that moment. Completely. Quietly. The way you change your mind when you understand that the decision you made was based on who you used to be, and you are not that person anymore. I said, "I'm always coming, Bug. That's not the kind of thing that changes." She seemed satisfied. She jumped down from the counter and went to find her fox. I stood in the bathroom for a moment. Then I called Vesper. She picked up on the first ring. I said, "Ma, change the custody filing." She said, "I already did. I've been waiting for you to get there." I said, "How long?" She said, Since you told me about the drawing." Sloan came to the archive at 6 in the morning on the day of the hearing. I was already there. I'm always there early, the cold tile, the fluorescents settling into their hum, the smell of old paper and institutional cleaner that I'd stopped noticing years ago and had started noticing again recently, because everything had started mattering differently. I heard the loading dock door. She knew that entrance. She'd visited me at lunch for 3 years, always came in through the back because parking was easier. I'd thought about that when I chose where to be. She came down the stairs quickly. She was wearing her court clothes, which meant she'd planned this before she'd planned the hearing. Her face was the face of someone who has been awake since 3 a.m. running scenarios. She said, "Give me the folder." I said, "Which one?" "You know which one." I reached under the table and handed her a folder. She took it. She opened it. It was empty. She stared at it. She looked up at me. She said, "Where?" "The copies are with Vesper," I said. "The originals are filed with the court. You can have the folder." She stood there holding the empty folder in both hands. The fluorescents hummed above us. The cold tile was cold. She looked at me with an expression I didn't have a category for. Not anger exactly, not grief exactly. Something between them that had no name. Because it's the specific feeling of understanding that you have been outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated, and that the underestimation was your own. She left without saying anything else. I watched her go up the stairs. The loading dock door opened and closed. I sat down. The fluorescents hummed. I looked at the table where the documentation had been spread 14 months ago, where I'd looked at Wren's crayon drawing and felt something go quiet and cold in the center of my chest. The table was empty now. The file was complete. The courthouse hallway at 7 a.m. smells like burnt coffee and old wood, and the particular staleness of a building that has been absorbing human difficulty for 100 years. I'd been in the building before. Records work, document filings. I'd never been on this side of it. Vesper was already there, coffee in hand, reviewing something on her phone. She looked up when I came in and said, "Sloan's attorney requested a continuance. Judge Marsh denied it." I said, "Good." Dr. Pruitt testified at 9. She was precise, the way she always was, measured, every word placed where it would do the most work. She testified not about privilege, not about Sloan, not about me. She testified about Wren, behavioral patterns, anxiety presenting as separation difficulty, sleep regression, the drawings. She had 4 of the drawings. She described them clinically, which made them more devastating than any emotional framing would have. Sloan's attorney objected twice. Judge Marsh overruled both times, with the expression of a woman who has heard every version of this story and believes none of them. During the recess, Sloan found me in the hallway. She said, "You turned my therapist against me." Her voice was loud enough that 2 clerks at the records window looked up. I said, "Dr. Pruitt testified about Wren, not you. She was my therapist." "She was our couple's therapist," I said. "There's a difference." She said, "You planned all of this, every single piece of it. You've been planning it for months, and I didn't—" "Sloan," I said, "don't." "I realized something," I said, keeping my voice at the same level it always was. "You're not a serious person. I mean that as a statement of fact, not an insult. You never were, and I didn't see it, and that's partly on me." She threw her coffee cup at the wall. It was paper, so it bounced. Coffee went across the baseboard. The 2 clerks pretended not to see. A third one, coming around the corner, stopped and reversed. I looked at the coffee running down the wall. I looked at her. I said, "That's going to be in the record." I went back into the courtroom. Judge Aldine Marsh was 62, silver-haired, with the specific patience of someone who has stopped being surprised by human behavior and has decided to simply manage it. She read the custody recommendation from the guardian ad litem. She reviewed Dr. Pruitt's testimony. She looked at the financial documentation Vesper had submitted. She awarded primary physical custody to me. Sloan got every other weekend, pending a review at 6 months. The room was very quiet. Outside on the courthouse steps, Vesper said, "You want to hear the settlement number?" I said, "Is it enough to matter to him?" She said, "It's enough to show up when you search his name." I said, "That's enough." I called Cass on the way to my car. She said, I heard, congratulations. I said, thank you for everything. The process server, the boardroom, all of it. She said, no, that's literally my job. Pause. You should actually look at singletune.com. Not as a thing to do right now, just my cousin matched with someone who'd been through the same situation. Custody, the whole thing. Same values profile. They talked for 3 weeks before they even exchanged photos. I said, what did the values test ask? She said, what you'd do if you found out someone you loved had been lying to you for a year. I stood in the parking lot. The burnt coffee smell was still in my jacket from the hallway. The courthouse door opened and closed behind me. I said, I'll look at it. I meant it this time. The civil suit settled on a Tuesday. Vesper sent me the confirmation at 11:43 a.m. I was in the archive basement when it came through, cold tile, fluorescents humming their flat note, the smell of old paper. I looked at the number on my phone for a long time. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about the record. What actually happened, when, and in what order. The record was complete. Donovan's name was attached to a public civil judgment in Millhaven County that would be there when anyone searched it, the way documents are always there when you know where to look. I set the phone face down on the table. The fluorescents hummed. I sat there for a while in the cold, in the quiet, in the specific piece of a file that has been properly closed. Donovan resigned from Ag and Trust on a Friday. I was on the course when Vesper texted, "It's done." I read the text. I finished the whole. I didn't text anyone. I shot 81. Personal best. The course was quiet, mid-morning, mostly empty. The cart paths were cracked the same way they'd always been. The seventh hole had a slight dogleg left that I'd never fully trusted, and I trusted it today. And it paid off the way things pay off when you've stopped second-guessing yourself. I was lining up a putt on the seventh green when I heard footsteps on the cart path. Donovan came around the corner of the green. He was in civilian clothes, no jacket, no bank VP presentation. He looked like a man who had spent several weeks not sleeping and had stopped trying to look like he had. His jaw was set. He'd had a couple of drinks, not enough to be obvious. Enough to have made the decision to come here. He said, "You didn't have to go to the board." I lined up the putt. I said, "I know. You had what you needed. The lawsuit, the divorce. You didn't have to take my job." I said, "I know." He grabbed my arm. His grip was the grip of a man who has run out of other options. I turned. He was close, closer than I'd expected. His face had the specific expression of a man who's about to do something he knows is a mistake and has decided to do it anyway. I said, "Don't." He swung. He was 2 drinks in and hadn't slept properly in weeks. So the swing was wide and came from the wrong angle. I stepped back 1 step, and his fist went past my shoulder and his momentum carried him forward, and he went down on 1 knee on the cart path. The cart path was cracked concrete. It sounded like it hurt. 2 golfers on the adjacent fairway had stopped walking. They were watching. One of them had his phone out. Donovan got up slowly. He looked at his knee. He looked at me. I picked up my ball marker from the green. I said, "That's going to be a problem for your attorney." I walked to the 8th tee. I finished the round. Shot 81. I didn't look back. I drove home with the windows down. Cut grass and cooling asphalt through the vents. The same smell as the Tuesday 14 months ago when everything was fine and I'd driven home from the same course, not knowing it wasn't. The town looked the same. It always does. That's the thing about small towns. They absorb what happens in them and keep looking exactly like themselves. Sloane's last voicemail played while I was on the county road because my phone connected to the car and I hadn't cleared the queue. Her voice came through the speakers. "You took everything." I deleted it without replying. The walkout had been at the Cartwright. This was the silence after. I thought, I lost a brother, a wife, and the version of myself that trusted easily. I sat with that for the length of the county road. I considered whether that version deserved to survive. I didn't have an answer. I pulled into the driveway on Sycamore Lane and turned off the engine. Wren was on the porch with her crayon box. She was sitting cross-legged on the top step, the box open beside her, a piece of paper on the porch boards in front of her. She was pressing hard with the orange crayon the way she always pressed, like the paper needed to be convinced. She looked up when she heard the car. She held up the drawing. Just him and her. No labels, no Daddy D. Just two stick figures, a house, a sun with too many rays. 8 of them, maybe 9. Because she always gave the sun more rays than it needed, as if she wanted to make sure it had enough. I got out of the car. She ran to me. I picked her up and she was warm and solid and real, in the specific way that 4-year-olds are real. Completely without qualification, without anything held back. She smells like sunscreen and crayon wax. I carry her inside. The drawing is still in my hand. I think about what Vesper said, that I'm a precise person, not a bad one. I think she's half right. I set Ren down in the kitchen. She goes immediately to the crayon box she's left on the counter, because she has a system, and the system requires the crayons to be in the box before dinner. I pinned the drawing to the refrigerator, next to the one from last year. The one that said Daddy D is already gone. I took it down the night I changed my mind about custody, the night I stood in the bathroom and understood that some decisions are made in the body, before the mind catches up. I'd kept it, though, filed it, old habit. The refrigerator hums. Ren counts her crayons. Outside, the light is doing that specific late afternoon thing it does in September, going gold and long across the yard, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they've been considered. I look at the drawing with its sun that has too many rays. I leave it there.